My name is Will Robinson. I'm the former chairman of the Chamber's Legislative Committee. Before we start, please turn off your cell phones and mobile devices. And remember, our legislators have banned all texting. No, kidding. Not all texting. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this recap of the legislative session. I would like to ask everyone to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There are several elected officials I'd like to introduce that are in our audience. Please stand and be recognized, and let's hold all our applause to the end. Manatee County Commissioner Betsy Benak. I saw Betsy earlier. Manatee County Commissioner Robin D. Sabatino. Robin? Manatee County Commissioner Michael Gallen. Manatee County Commissioner Carol Whitmore. School Board Chairman Karen Carpenter. Manatee County Sheriff Brad Stubbe. And Gary Tibbetts with Congressman Buchanan's office. Did I miss anyone? I don't think I did. Thank you all for coming. I'd also like to recognize the Chamber's Legislative Committee. We call ourselves the Commandos. Please rise and wave to everyone. We did a great job this session, I think. Ray and Trudy. Great job, everyone. Our sponsor for today's event is Bright House Networks. We appreciate your ongoing support. Thank you. METV is also televising and taping this event for a future broadcast. You'll find your Chamber's legislative priorities at your seat. Economic development and business climate issues, including tax incentive and sports performance, were at the top of the Chamber's list this session. Congratulations on the $2.3 million for IMG and $5 million for rowing facilities. It is subject to the governor's approval, as we know. The technical school funding formula was similar to last year's formula, but resulted in a funding increase to MTI of almost 10% compared to last year. The legislature also passed bills that expedited manufacturing site approval processes, a public-private partnership bill, and eliminated sales tax on manufacturing equipment and investments for a 3-year period. Overall, it was a banner year for Manatee County and Floridians, and subject to the governor's approval, the Chamber was successful in 8 of its 10 top business issues. So congratulations. Now I'd like to introduce our legislative delegation. Representative Jim Boyd, House District 71. Senator Bill Galvano, Senate District 26. Representative Greg Stubbe, District 73. We only have 3 of y'all, so I had 8 minutes each, but we can have a couple extra minutes. So please keep your thoughts between 8 and 10 minutes, and we're going to save all our questions to the end, and at your seat you should also find the Q&A guidelines. So when we get to that point, I'll have y'all come up to the podium and ask our legislators a specific question. Please identify which legislator or legislators you'd like to have those questions directed to, and we'll try to get as many questions as we can answered before we leave. First up to the podium is Representative Jim Boyd.
Jimmy.
Thanks very much, Will, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's an hour later than normal, so you know, that's maybe nice for some of you. Bob, I know it's hard for you to get up early, but thanks for having us, and what a beautiful place to have this meeting. I want to just talk briefly about some of the things that we did collectively, but more importantly, what each one of us did individually that maybe kind of made the collective effort a little more fun, because all of us will probably be saying a lot of the same thing. Senator Galvano on the Senate side was a great partner and Representative Stubbe and I on the House side, and Representative Roussan, who maybe still even will get here, I hope he does, had a good session as well over there. As you know, this year our budget was a little better than normal. The first 2 years that Representative Stubbe and I were up in Tallahassee, we had a $6 billion shortfall. This year, with the economy improving and things going a little bit better, obviously we had a little more money in the state budget that we were able to deal with, which is a good thing. But in a sense, it's a good thing. But then also on the other side of it, we tried to manage our commitment and our promise to the taxpayers, at least from our side, that we do what is prudent and responsible with your money as well, and not just spend money because we have it to spend. So we did try to do what was prudent and what was responsible with this year about a $74.5 billion budget. And some of the things that Will alluded to a moment ago were good things that we could do. You know, education was a winner. I'm not going to speak a lot about that because Senator Galvano is the Education Appropriations Chair for the Senate, so he's got a lot more depth and detail on that than I do. But that's good for our schools, that's good for our universities, that's good for our state colleges. So I'm very excited that we were able to do some more in terms of that. We were able to finally take care of our state workers. You know, for 5 or 6 years they've gone without pay raises, like many of us in the private sector. The same thing, but we were able to figure in a pay raise for them, as well as teachers this year, based on the performance metrics and standards that we put in place a couple years ago. So that was a good thing as well. I think the legislature this year, as Will also mentioned, was somewhat friendly to some of our local projects. And again, you know, you need to be careful on that because you don't want to just spend, but we tried to identify the things that were important to our economy and to our communities and work on those. Certainly the facility we're in, hopefully if the governor signs it, $2.3 million additional economic incentive money will come here to help them expand. I read through the course of the session, you know, and many people don't know that IMG produces about $500 million in economic opportunity in its company. So that's a huge number, and it's a huge number for our region and for our state. So very excited about that. Also, some of the local money for some county work that needed to be done with water projects and the like. So all those are in. If you have a direct line to the governor and those issues are important to you, I would suggest using it. You know, he'll look at the budget very carefully and decide what he thinks should stay and what should go, and he's got the ability to take line by line out. So I'm sure those of us at the front table have already made our calls to him and advocated for the things that are important. But if you have a connection or a way that you want to communicate that with his office or with him personally, I would certainly encourage you to do that because the next couple weeks are going to be critical in terms of what happens there. I know we're short on time, so I'll just talk about a little bit what I worked on this year. The Speaker asked me this year to be chairman of Ethics and Elections Committee, which I did. And at the outset, I was like, wow, I don't know a thing about that. What am I going to do in this position? But we had a great committee. We had great members. We had some senior members that were good leaders. And we were able to pass through our Ethics and Elections Committee 3 bills that went to the floor. All of them passed the floor, both on our side and the Senate side. And 2 of them have been signed by the governor. 1 of them is still waiting to be signed. The 2 that have been signed are ethics reform and campaign finance reform and elections reform that we kind of passed in a compromise with our friends in the Senate. The last day of session is in the governor's office now waiting to be signed, and we have every expectation that will be signed. And what we did really, there's a lot of detail and I won't bore you with it, but you know, 2 years ago we passed some elections reform that we thought was good, but it created some problems in some areas that we learned about. And over the course of from January through session, we heard from many of the stakeholders, supervisor of elections, different groups, League of Women Voters, just about everybody and anybody that had a issue in that arena came and spoke to us, and we put together what I think is a good bill that kind of takes care of some of the problems that everybody was experiencing and modernizes us to a point where I believe we're in the forefront in the nation, not only with elections reform but also with ethics reform and campaign finance. So those were that was a great privilege for me to be able to serve as chairman of that committee. We had huge bipartisan support of those issues. On the elections and the ethics bill, they passed both committees unanimously, and then passed the House with 1 dissenting vote, and it was a fellow Republican, and there's a whole long story to that, which is somewhat entertaining, but nonetheless, it was not Stubbe. A guy named Representative John Tobiah from over on the other coast, who's a good guy, but he had some personal issues with it. But the point of that is we worked very hard together, Republicans and Democrats, to do the right thing, and I think we did it, and I think that was evidenced by the product that came out of both chambers, and it went to the governor for his signature. Another area that Will mentioned, manufacturing. We were among the lowest in the country in terms of attracting manufacturers to our state. So Senator Galvano and I worked on a bill that streamlines and passed it, and it's at the governor's office as well. Worked on it together to streamline the process of manufacturing approval so we could be more manufacturing friendly in the state of Florida. So again, there's a lot of detail around it, but it shortens the approval process. It gives local government ultimate authority whether they want to enact the ordinance or not. In fact, our county has already been doing that under the leadership of our great county commission and Mr. Hunsicker and John Barnott. They've already been doing it. John even came to Tallahassee and testified on the bill, and I don't know how it went through the Senate. I didn't watch the votes over there, but in the House it got unanimous support, and it was unanimous in the Senate as well. So that shows you another, I think, just another good bill and good legislation that we were able to work on together that I think will improve us dramatically in terms of manufacturing opportunity for the state of Florida. So that hopefully we'll see some some activity even in our area as a result of that. A couple other quick things that I worked on this year. CFO had a bill that modernized kind of the fire marshal statutes and language and the like, and it was, when I first took it on, it was a 300-page bill, and thankfully we didn't have that on the auto reader the last couple days of session where Mary would have had to read that, or I'd have probably had a whole lot of enemies. But we passed that, and that just modernizes the fire marshal language, and it had broad support from all the stakeholders involved, the fire marshals and fire chiefs and firemen and the like across the state. And then what I thought was a simple little bill, insurance forms and rate filing, that just streamlines the rate approval and the form approval process. The Commissioner of Insurance, Kevin McCarty, asked us to do it. It lightens his workload. It makes a little bit quicker speed to market on some of the insurance issues, non-controversial issues, ones that aren't going to cause anybody any grief or any heartburn, but it was just a way to streamline the process in his office and get products to the market quicker. So that's what we worked on. Real quickly, citizens is on everybody's mind. Citizens insurance, still a big issue. I wasn't on insurance committee this year, so I didn't have any direct influence on that. But I think the product that came out of the House and the Senate that creates a clearinghouse for processing business that comes through citizens was a good thing and probably a good step. The reality is, I think it finally hit me between the eyes that we do have a big problem that we need to get our arms around, but we're only going to be able to fix it incrementally. We can't obviously raise rates in a kind of a nilly-willy fashion. They've got to be manageable or controlled. So those are the types of things that will still probably have attention in the years ahead of us, but it's something I think that we do need to still focus on as a state because it's a big issue and it could be a big financial burden to us if we have a 04-05 storm season again. So those are the things that we worked on together. I think we had a great session. There was a Bill's been there a lot longer than we have been. He probably felt some of this before too, but we had I thought a really, really huge bipartisan kind of camaraderie that everybody worked together for the right things. Jobs in the economy, we tried to still focus on that, even though we know we're starting to, improve a little bit. We still know we've got work to do there, and we don't want to, forget about that as a important issue. But together, the Republicans and Democrats alike, I think, rolled up their sleeves and worked on some good stuff together, and I think we accomplished a lot of good together. Obviously, there's a few things that are still out there looming. And the big elephant in the room, obviously, is the Medicaid expansion, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But we still have some time to work there, I think. But together, I think we did a lot of good. We tried to remember who sent us there and what you sent us there for, and tried to work hard on doing the right thing. So with that, I'll hush up for a while and be glad to answer questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Bill Galvano.
Good morning. First, let me say it's great to be back in Manatee County. After a while in Tallahassee, you start to get a little stir crazy. You're in the building, sometimes 18 hours a day, and to be back here to see our views, our nature, and everything is really good. And it's been a busy week since I've been back. We got finished, a week ago Friday, And then last week we had a big announcement with Coca-Cola. How many saw that, the Coca-Cola expansion? That's huge. You can applaud. That's fantastic because that means we have a lot of work to do over the summer, and after spending a session where greening in our citrus industry was such a major issue, and to see Coca-Cola partner with Cutrale and Peace River and make that type of commitment to the state of Florida is fantastic. And so that's something I hope the Chamber watches and monitors going forward, certainly something I will be involved in over the coming months. Before I go any further, I want to tell you have two great guys here that are doing a phenomenal job in the House of Representatives. They both have distinguished themselves. It was great coming back into the legislative process, knowing that I had Representative Boyd and Representative Stubbe in the House, and I really appreciated the way we worked together and the way that we all were able to prioritize the issues for Manatee County and to work as a delegation for Manatee County, and I really appreciate it. It's an honor to serve with both of them. As Representative Boyd said, this session was probably, in my 9 regular sessions, that excludes the special sessions, the most open, bipartisan, productive, effective session I've experienced in a very long time. And a lot of credit goes to the presiding officers, Speaker Weatherford, and certainly Senate President Don Gates. I felt like he did a phenomenal job in conducting the business of the Senate. And because we had that type of atmosphere, we were able to accomplish a lot. We were effective. You just heard about some of the things that we were able to do. Ethics reform, raising the bar on elected officials, including ourselves. Elections reform. We prioritized conservation, $70 million in protecting our environment. We were able to give tax relief to consumers. We were able to address and clarify legislative intent on internet gaming and internet cafes. All of these big issues, big lifts that in years past you might have seen dominate this session as a single issue session, but we're able to get them together and move forward with this aggressive agenda because of the way we all worked together. From my perspective, I was chairing the Education Appropriations Committee in the Senate. And the way it was set up this year was to put pre-K, K-12, college system, technical education, and the university system under one budget. So we had a lot of moving parts within this one budget. And we took a very deliberative approach. I came in, I know I scared some of the people in this room because we started zeroing out projects that we felt we didn't have enough information on. We asked the colleges and universities to submit evaluation forms to show us what they were doing, how it was being spent. Was it the project that was intended when it was originally funded? And at the end of that first initial exercise, we cut close to $80 million out of projects in the colleges and universities. And as you can imagine, my office became very popular very quick after that. But it was the ability, it gave us the ability to prioritize as members of the legislature as to what was important and what needed to be covered and where we needed to go as a state, instead of a perfunctory exercise just putting money back into projects and lines that existed in the past. And it also empowered the citizens to be able to weigh in and give input so that we would prioritize where it was necessary. And then we were able to build back and brought back actually a very robust education budget, one that we're very proud of, and you should be as well. This education budget is probably the best that we've seen in the state of Florida in maybe a decade. I mean, starting with pre-K, we've increased funding by $5 million. In K through 12, a $1.1 billion increase. So that's a huge increase per student within that system. For Manatee County, that means an additional $22 million for our school district in this next fiscal year, taking into account the new students that we have. Also prioritizing things like classroom supplies, teacher lead, $14 million, because I was tired of hearing about teachers coming out of their own pockets to put items and work materials in the classroom, kept that separate. The teacher raise issue that was a priority for the governor was also a priority for the legislature. And we added $480 million for pay raises for instructional personnel. We took it beyond just the classroom teacher and included guidance counselors and others who contribute to the education of our young people. And as a legislature, we put some parameters and some thresholds there so that while the districts have maximum flexibility, it's still tied to performance so that your tax dollars are being used in an effective and efficient manner. In the college system, we were able to increase funding in a line that we classified as equity funding, $33 million to make sure all of our state colleges were going up. We went back and put in projects that we prioritized. And again, when I say we prioritize, that's very important because the legislature is the appropriating body. And so often we get caught up with Tax Watch and other entities that say, oh, well, no agency recommended this or this wasn't on the governor's list. Well, that's fine, but it's our decision what gets appropriated and how it gets appropriated. And we do it based on the priorities that you set out for us. And so that's how we put these projects back in. At the university level, we started out by restoring $300 million that had been borrowed, for lack of a better word, last fiscal year to make sure we were able to meet other demands of the budget. And we did it without strings attached. We recognized that this needed to be the base level going forward, and that's the way we did it. In addition to that, we increased funding across the board. We established a preeminence program beginning with University of Florida. University of Florida meets 12 out of 12 criteria to be a top 10 university. And we established funding to allow them to make those next couple of adjustments to get into that category so that Florida will have that type of university system. And it's not an exclusive club. We've put funding in for FSU. We anticipate USF. We want to break that ceiling so that our university system can be recognized around the nation as the top. We also created an online university within the state of Florida. In addition to that, we reworked how we do remediation at the college level to make sure that our students are getting out and getting jobs and being successful. So there were so many things that we were able to accomplish as a legislature, as a team, Senate and House, in order to bring Florida education to the next level. And I can tell you this too, we didn't go on a spending spree. We put money aside in reserves. So we didn't spend everything we had the opportunity to spend. We were responsible, but yet recognized what our priorities were. And there's still work to be done on some issues, and Senate or Representative, maybe that's a precursor. Representative Boyd mentioned it with regard to Medicaid expansion. Would have liked to have seen that go through. In addition to that, we had pension reform that we still need to work on. But given the overall picture of session and in what was accomplished and what was left to deal with, and that are not issues where time is of the essence, it was very successful. So again, it's a real pleasure to represent this area and the other areas that make up District 26. And we're going to have a busy summer and then hopefully another great session next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Now, Representative Greg Stubbe.
Thanks, Will. And thank you for having us again. It's always a pleasure to be before the chamber. And as both of my colleagues have said, we had a really great session this year. They've kind of hit on all the high-level issues, a lot of the things that we dealt with and that were in the papers that you heard a lot about. So what I'll do real quickly, because I would like to get I'd love to hear what issues and questions the audience has on what issues are important to you. So I'd talk a little bit about what I worked on personally and some of the bills that I had, one of which was one of the chamber's priorities was the public-private partnership bill. Last year, a similar bill passed in the House, but it died in the Senate. What this bill does, and there's been some misnomers about it, I sponsored the public-private partnership bill in the House. We had quite a effort to get it through. It actually passed the last day. It's one of those bills where you're kind of starting to sweat it out as it gets into the last week. I had passed it through all of the House committees, and then it passed through the House, and we sent it over to the Senate as a House message to the Senate. And it was brought up on second reading on Thursday, the second to last day before session, voted on Friday morning, the last day of session, sent back to the House. As soon as it was sent back to the House in a Senate message, I went to the leadership of the House and I said, can we get this back on the agenda today? Because that's the only way that this bill is going to get out. So I was able to finagle time again to get it back on the floor for a second time. I had a reporter call me and said, how can a bill pass the House floor twice? So I had to explain to them how the process worked, but we were able to get that out. What that bill does, and I really think that a lot of the funding in the state of Florida is really going to move in this direction. You know, PICO dollars, as Senator Galvano has probably talked about and can allude on a little bit more, there's not a lot of PICO dollars out there for infrastructure projects for especially university systems. What this bill does is allow private investors to come in and fund infrastructure projects for any public entity. So Manatee County could take advantage of this, Port Manatee could take advantage of this, the city of Sarasota could take advantage of this, any public entity, and even the hospitals. I worked very fervently with all of the hospital associations, especially the safety net hospitals, with this bill, because they wanted to make sure that, because there's still technically some of the public hospitals could take advantage of this. And so what this allows is private investors to come in and say, okay, and I'll give you an example. Maybe Sarasota Memorial Hospital wants to do a parking garage. If they find an investor that wants to come in and fund that parking garage so taxpayers don't have to spend the money to do it, then the private investor can fund it. They enter into an agreement between the public entity and the private investor to finance the infrastructure project. The project gets built with not much at all taxpayer dollars, if some very little, and the public gets to use this whatever project it is. So it's really a way in the state of Florida moving forward that we can really do some very big infrastructure projects. I had Nassau County come to me and tell me that they had an $8 million road project that they were waiting to get done and waiting for this bill to go through because it was the only way that they could finance the road project. I've had very large Spanish and French investors that have said that that big connector that they want to do between Orlando and Miami, that's like a $3 to $4 billion project, this can now be funded through a public-private partnership because DOT had a part in this bill and will be able to be involved in projects like that. So you didn't hear a lot about it in the paper, but I really think as we move forward in the state of Florida with funding still being not to the level that it's been in the past for infrastructure projects, a way to give a lot of flexibility to our public entities and our local governments to be able to fund projects that they otherwise wouldn't be able to fund and be able to give that benefit to the public without the taxpayer having to pay for it and the influx of private dollars into the state to create jobs. So all around, I think it was a win-win for the state of Florida, from the construction industry to the public entities and to the state. So that was one of the toughest bills I worked on this year because of the amount of entities that were involved. Everybody wanted a piece of the pie, whether it be the cities or the counties or the universities. So it was interesting to move that bill through the process, and I was very happy to see that we were able to get it passed the last day of session. And I have heard that the governor does support public-private partnerships in the state, so hopefully he will sign that in the next couple of weeks. The next bill that I passed, I did the Fish and Wildlife Commission's package bill this year. That included several veteran aspects to it. So if you're a disabled veteran now in the state of Florida, you can get your license fees free. So if you want to hunt or fish in the state of Florida and you're a disabled veteran, then you can apply for that license in the state of Florida and be able to participate in that without having to pay the license fee. Some of the other things that we did is we extended the days for saltwater fishing to encourage the use of our natural resources in this great state and encourage tourism in our state. So that was one of the bills that I worked on. That passed very early on in session, and hopefully the governor will approve that as well. One of the other bills that I passed was a veterans organizations bill. You probably heard in the paper the Allied Veterans Organization in Jacksonville that was involved in all that fraud. The lieutenant governor resigned because of some of the things that were going on that. My bill was actually filed before any of that ever occurred. There's been real instances of people using veterans and using veterans organizations as a way to raise money, and the money's actually not going to veterans, and it's not going to veterans organizations. And I saw that type of fraud shouldn't be tolerated in the state of Florida. So what my bill does is requires that those organizations, 51% of everything that they take in has to go directly to the actual service that they say that they're serving. Everything has to go to the veterans organizations or their families. So they could take 49% for administrative costs, but 51% has to go to the service of veterans or whatever they claim to be. It actually would have directly addressed the issue that Allied veterans caused in Jacksonville had this bill been passed 2 years ago, and would actually makes it a crime to be able to do these things. The House bill we felt was a little bit stronger of language. It required them to submit their application through DOACS, the Department of Ag and Consumer Services, and ours actually was a third-degree felony, was the crime that we had put it in there. The Senate version, which we ended up taking because it came over late in session and we just wanted to get the bill approved, makes it a first-degree misdemeanor, and it also makes it a violation of the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. So we actually put some teeth into the laws that relates to these veterans organizations, because we have and being a veteran, going to some of these events, you never know when a guy in a uniform, I drive in Sarasota all the time, you see guys on the side of the road in uniforms, not with any lapels or insignia on. You don't know if they're actual veterans or not. So this will assure that anything that is raised for veterans and their families actually goes to veterans and their families. So I was proud to be involved with that. I did 3 other bills that I want to talk about real quick. These did not make it through the process. One you probably heard about several times in multiple different news articles was my school safety bill. I actually was going to be able to get that out of the House. We had 2 committees in the House, a subcommittee, and I actually had 2 Democrats vote for the bill. And then we got it out of Judiciary Committee. And the only reason we didn't want to do a floor vote was because it wasn't going to get picked up in the Senate, and we didn't want to waste the floor time. Let me tell you what the bill actually does, because there was a lot of misconceptions about what it actually did. What the bill did was that it allowed anybody that went through the exact same training as an armed security guard to be designated by a principal in our elementary, middle schools, and high schools to carry a concealed firearm during the time of their employment. So they were required to go through the exact same training that an armed security guard is required to go through. Then they would have to get designated. So the principal at that school would have to choose to designate that individual who has already gone through that training. And it was completely volitional. So if the principal at XYZ school didn't want to do it, they didn't have to do it. If they wanted to take advantage of this program to ensure a future safety program for their school, they could. I can't tell you how many principals, school board members that I had approach me and thank me for filing this legislation, because, and I'll give you an example, Mayak Elementary School is a good 20, 30, 45 minutes from the Good Sheriff's response units if there's not anybody out in that area. And I actually had them say, we're a good 20 minutes away. If something happens out here, I want the ability to defend our children if the circumstance would present itself. But I had principals from all over the school board members from all over the state approach me on that. I will be doing that bill next year. What I'm looking to do is make it more of a license and more specific training. One of the opponents to the bill's issues was that it's not the same training as a school resource officer, which is true. They're not certified law enforcement officers. But what we're going to do next year is require a specific license to go through very similar training that a school resource officer goes through. Both in Manatee County and in other counties in the state, the SROs go through 1 day a year of what's called active shooter training. So they either go to a shooting house or something along those lines where they have a full day, 8 hours of active shooting training. So we're going to add that in to put further training requirements in. I'm also going to extend it to the universities and colleges. There's actually 8 states in the country, Hawaii being one of them, and I lived in Hawaii for 3 years when I was stationed there in my service in the Army, and it is one of the most liberal states in the Union. There's only 1 Republican member in the legislature in Hawaii, and they allow concealed permit carry holders to carry on school grounds. So there are a lot of states that already do this before the events that happen in Connecticut, and there's been a lot of states that have taken action after that to ensure that their children on their school campuses are safe. So I will look forward to moving that forward next year, and hopefully we can get some movement on that in the Senate next year and continue that conversation. One other bill I'd like to talk about real quick, and then I'll turn it over to questions. I was disappointed. This bill went all the way through the process in the House. I had 4 committee hearings in the House, which is a lot to have to take a bill through 4 committees in the House. Unanimous approval in every one of the committees in the House. It was the E911 legislation this year, which now I've been told next year the governor's office will fully support and endorse. This year they didn't want to get there because of the way that we extended the program. Let me tell you a little bit about what it does. Right now, all of you probably have postpaid on your cell phones, Verizon, AT&T. You pay a 50 cents 911 service tax when you pay your bill every month. You probably don't notice it because it's chalked in with all the other fees that you pay and taxes that you pay. But you pay 50 cents every month to fund 911 services in each of the counties or cities that have 911 funding. So when you call 911, somebody's actually there to answer the call. What my bill did is extend that to the prepaid individuals. So Metro PCS, Walmart, Target. So if you walk into Walmart and you want to buy a disposable cell phone and get 60 minutes on it, right now they don't pay the tax. But I'm pretty sure they're going to want to use 911 if they have an emergency. So what this bill did is put a mechanism in place to allow collection for the prepaid and the postpaid, and I reduced the tax from 50 cents a month to 43 cents a month. So it was a tax reduction, but it extended it to everybody in the state because there has been a dramatic decline, and the sheriff could probably also talk about this, in funding to our 911 services in the state of Florida to the point where they're struggling to make sure that they have people there to answer the calls. Polk County is one of the worst. Polk County came to every one of my committee hearings, the administrator for that program, begging and pleading the legislature to take action on this because they don't know if they're going to be able to fully fund their 911 communications, and that's not good for citizens, and that's not good for the state of Florida. And what better thing could we do with taxpayer dollars than make sure that when you need a 911 emergency call that there's somebody there. This also would have further extended and allow us to use the capabilities that we technologically have right now, like texting 911. I don't know if you've seen, well, I'm sure you saw it, but when the Boston issue occurred, the 911 administrators, they were actually telling people, don't call because you're shutting down our system, text 911, and we will get your information that way. We don't have that capability in the state of Florida, and we don't have that capability in the state of Florida because we don't have the funding mechanism in place to be able to have that. If there's a situation where you're trapped and you can't speak, or you're kidnapped and you can't speak, but you can text 911, why would we not want the opportunity to save that person, all for the fact that we don't have the funding mechanism in place? The prepaid people were supportive of it. The 911 services were supportive of it. Every telecommunication industry, Verizon, AT&T, you name it, they were in support of it. Even the people that aren't currently having to collect it, like Walmart and Target, were supportive of my bill. So I was frustrated that that didn't pass this year, but we're looking forward to next year, that bill passing and ensuring that in the state of Florida, we will have texting 911 in every precinct in every county in the state of Florida to know that we are going to save lives in that regard. And with that, that's some of the bills that I worked on, and I look forward to all your questions. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Representative. We are 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Wow, this is great. And the next 20 minutes is your time to ask our legislators any questions you may have. We have a microphone. I see Dr. Conard stepping up to the microphone with the very first question. It won't be turned on. The TV is the only one that'll hear it, so I'll have to repeat your question for the audience.
By refusing to acknowledge it. And what I'm speaking to there is since 2010, the Affordable Care Act has been deemed a constitutional act, stating that as of January 2014, all Americans will have access to basic health care. And it looks to me like this entire expansion of Medicaid issue is very inflexible in the way the House is handling that. And I wonder if you could give us some enlightenment on that.
Medicaid expansion, Representative Stubbe.
Well, I had no idea that question was going to come up this morning. Let me start with this, and I'm going to take your question a little bit farther. One of the things that was in that Supreme Court decision declaring that Obamacare was constitutional was the right for states to opt in or out. So it's the state's decision on whether they want to expand Medicaid and how much they want to expand it and how they want to do it. So I want to preface my comments with that. At the very first day of our opening session, our speaker made a very direct issue on the issue of Medicaid expansion and basically said that he's not going to support Medicaid expansion under his speakership. So the bar was set pretty early. That was the opening day of session, his remarks. So when you have the leader of your chamber that is taking a very staunch position on a certain item, it would be very difficult for what occurred in the Senate to come over and us to pick it up. Now, let me tell you what the House plan was, and I can't get you, I wasn't on the PPAGA committee, the Affordable Health Care Act committee, but I can kind of tell you a little bit what it did. What we did was right now, I think disabled children are 100% covered, but the families of those disabled children are only covered up to 36%. So the Healthy Families Plan, which is what the plan was in the House, would have taken that 36% up to 100% for those families. It also took over from the poverty line. I think we did like 80%. It takes it up to 100% on one of the other factors. It was called the Healthy Family Plan. And there's actually, I can get you a packet on what the actual details of that plan were. Obviously very controversial in the House side because a lot of obviously the hospitals wanted us to expand because of the Medicaid reimbursement in place for that. But the bottom line is if the leadership is not going to go in a direction on an issue like that, then the House is going to not be able to take that direction on it. The plan that Negron Care, I guess it was dubbed from the Senate that came over, actually got some bipartisan support. I think there was 1 or 2 Republicans that voted for it. But the leadership in the House, Speaker Weatherford, has taken a very fervent approach to what we're going to do. Now, I've heard rumors that we might have a special session on Medicaid. I don't know if that's going to occur or not. I don't think either chamber's leader is probably going to call it. The governor may call it, but if there's not an agreement in place on what we're actually going to do to move that ball forward, then I don't see that happening. You want to talk more about that?
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Conard. And I'll be brief. Just a couple of comments follow up to what Representative Stubbe said, and I'm sure the senator probably can give you a lot more detail on the Senate's plan. Several things too that impact this. I mean, as Representative Stubbe said, the House did put forward a plan that we thought was a good plan to take care of the needs of our Floridians. It cost Florida about $200 million, not potentially $50 billion if the feds bail out on us 2 or 3 years down the road and don't fund the full-on Medicaid expansion, which would cover 1 million or so people. Couple of stats: 600,000 or so of that million are childless adults that theoretically may or may not be able to work, thereby qualifying for some other forms of aid, even through the federal exchange that would happen anyway. So there are other mechanisms maybe to cover Florida. But I think the biggest, Floridian, excuse me, I think the biggest issue was long-term, what does this mean to taxpayers of Florida? You know, there's still a great deal of uncertainty. Yes, it's the law of the land. I don't think anybody in our chamber disputes that. But what impact does this have for Florida for the long run? You know, there's a lot of states beside Florida that are still hanging back, waiting to see. I mean, I read an article in the Braden Herald yesterday about Secretary Sebelius reaching out to private companies, insurance companies and the like, to help fund the implementation of the plan. So to me, that suggests there's still some issues that need to be dealt with on the federal level to kind of get states ready or not for what's to come. In the legislative process, I learned pretty early on a day is a long time, you know, when things are happening to get something done. You know, Greg talked about his bill at the last day passed, our elections bill at the last day passed. We've got until the end of the year, and I'm not suggesting we just kick the can down the road till the end of the year, but we do have, you know, some more time to look at this and try to decide if we are doing the right thing. I think, as Representative Stubbe said, the House has taken a pretty firm position based on what they think is good information and good data and a good plan that they've put out as an alternative. Where that goes, where the governor takes us, where the you know, in terms of a special session or not, I don't think anybody knows specifically right now. But there is still some time to work through this and try to piece the variables together and make sure we do the right thing for Florida. I think the biggest, at least in my opinion, the biggest overarching concern is what we put ourselves on the hook for long term. Certainly we want to take care of those that need help in our society. I think that's who we are as Americans. But what do we obligate ourselves for long term that we may or may not be able to pay? I mean, if let's say we had to pay the $50 billion 3 years from now, I mean, it would either bankrupt us or cost us enormous amount of taxpayers' dollars to try to fund that. So I'm not saying that's a reality, but that's something I think that's a backdrop against what we decide.
Thank you very much.
From the Senate perspective, I think it was unfortunate that the House took a hardline position out of the gate. And then, of course, the governor took another hardline position out of the gate. So we were sort of in the middle. And both presiding officers had set up select committees. And the whole point of those committees was to vet through the issue to see where it was going and to see how that we could address this. And if you go back and look at the news clips, you'll see that Senator Negron, who chaired that committee, and myself and other senators, we didn't embrace anything at the initial part of the session and then worked through it. Ultimately, we came up with two plans. One was a plan that was somewhere in between the House plan and the Negron plan. The Negron plan is what I supported, and that plan would have incorporated and utilized about $250 million of federal dollars to provide additional access to health care for Floridians. And the way that we did it was through the framework of the Kid Care plan that we had in place. And then some of you may recall that was something I worked on when I chaired health committees, because we wanted to have that level of accountability. And so, you know, these are our dollars. They're not printed in Washington, well, I guess maybe initially, but they come down here and we send them back up to Washington, and we felt like, as the third largest contributor in the United States of America, that we should be entitled to utilize some of these dollars to cover some of the cost of health care. I did speak with the Speaker about it. He did make the point that you know, we can watch and see what some of the other states will do. As I mentioned in the opening, I would like to have seen us take these steps, but time is not so much of the essence that we can't get there on time. And I don't believe we'll have a special session on it, given the polarizing positions that we have right now.
Thank you very much.
John.
Good morning. I mean, Dr. Conard's a hard act to follow. But anyway, for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Zimnicki. I'm a local architect, but I wear two hats. I'm chairman of the Board of Governors of MTI and the MTI Foundation. And here again, I want to thank the delegation, especially for helping us get funding for workforce development. 3 years in a row now, you've done well for us. You're our champions, and we appreciate it very much. And I just want to say thank you from MTI for helping us. And I know we have a little bit more work to do in getting that formula fixed and getting it in place forever. But I want to thank you very much, especially Senator Galvano. You've been our champion for years. And we love you guys, and we thank you very much. And MTI just cannot say thanks enough. And we are on our way to Kansas City so we can come back here and be 10-time national champions for Skills USA. So
Great.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Any other questions? Oh, come on. Oh, while y'all are thinking, I'll ask a question. Next session. Do any of y'all see any priorities for next session? I know you've been out, for 4 or 5 days? So I'm giving you a couple days to think about it. You know, we're going to have an election in 2014 with a governor. So is there reasonably going to be a lot that can be accomplished with all that political cloud hanging over Tallahassee? What are some of the priorities you all see for next session? Mr. Ward?
Thanks, Will. There's probably, you're right about being out a short period of time, and I don't think anybody's planned too far ahead other than those of us that maybe are starting to think about what we might like to work on personally from leadership. Both the Senate, Senator Galvano can speak to it, but better than I. But the House, I don't know that there's any set priorities. I think pension reform, as the Senator mentioned earlier, was a priority in the House this year, and it didn't pass. You know, and there was a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation about that. But it essentially, the big picture was going to a defined contribution plan versus a defined benefit and defined contribution is much like what we do as taxpayers and as business owners and as employees of various companies. That's the types of plans that we participate in. So the state system would look a little more like that and not have the potentially huge liability out there against the pension plan. So I think that probably will come back up. Education, I think, is going to be still huge to work toward. To John's point, I've having the senator over there now and been a champion of that effort for a long time, and us in the House, I know we're going to continue toward equity in funding. Chairman O'Toole is. She is, if nothing, she's a dog on those issues, and she is committed that she'll continue that fight for us as well. So I hope to see that equity balance out here, maybe even in the next session or so. So that'll be good. But those are a couple of things that I think are important to us. The Medicaid thing will certainly be a topic depending on how that works out between now and next year. But I don't know of anything huge that might be out there yet. These guys might be able to speak to it better.
On it. And I think Representative Boyd said it well. Medicaid expansion, pension reform is still out there. I know there's some capital projects that I'd like to reprioritize. State College of Florida needs some capital dollars. I want to work with the college over the summer to see if we can address that. There are some other funding projects within the community, within Manatee County, certainly within my Senate district that we'll work on, and we'll continue to work on expanding career and professional education initiatives. We took some big steps this year, starting in the K-12 through the technical ed, through college system, university system, and we put some things in place that will probably need to be tweaked and enhanced, but there will continue to be a major emphasis on creating jobs out of education and creating jobs in the community. And then finally the greening issue. That really worries me. We're talking about an industry that's been there for the state of Florida year after year after year after year, and they're facing some major challenges. We put $9 million into it this year. Let's hope next year we're continuing or wrapping up or taking steps to make sure we finalize our successful battle against this destroyer of our economy. Thanks.
Mr. Bartz.
Thank you. I'm probably naive, but it seems like with the president saying his top priority for the balance of his term is to get the Health Care Act implemented and sending his lieutenants, as Jim has referenced, out into the field to do whatever they can do, is there not an opportunity to negotiate some of the concerns that we have with Medicare expansion with him to see that this happens, with us being the third largest state in the union?
That's a great question. Others maybe will speak to this better than I, but and not to sound partisan at all, I don't mean it, because this is truly a bipartisan issue. There's been a pretty firm line drawn in the sand, I think, from the big house down. I think all of us would be willing to talk about what's right for Florida in our case, what's right for our citizens, what's right for those that need our help. And I certainly think that both the Senate and the House will work together over time. I mean, as Senator Galvano said, we had 3 different kind of positions, but I know that the legislature is a kind of a model for working together, and for all of us at some point ultimately hopefully agreeing on the right thing, and that would be what would be good for Florida. So I don't know that they're going to call us to talk about it. I know Florida is very important to the rollout of what's known as Obamacare, and I think if Florida doesn't do it, other states might follow our lead, and then there's those issues across the country. So I think personally, this is my personal opinion, I think other states, maybe 12 or 15, are looking at what Florida does to see where they go over the course of the next several months. So does that give Florida some leverage? Maybe it does in the negotiating arena as we go on. But I think the plan, at least from what I understand of it, is pretty set from the feds right now as to what they expect and what they want. Will there be some give and take along the way? Hopefully there will be on all our parts, frankly, so we do the right thing for not just Florida, but for the country, because it has big implications, I think, across the country as well, good and bad.
Clayton, do you have a question?
A quick one. Excuse me, is there any pending environmental legislation that we should be aware of or that might be, we can expect in the next legislative session? Environmental legislation.
For the next session?
Yes.
Any pending environmental legislation that you all can think of that's coming down the pike for the 14th session?
Everglades passed the Senate, right?
Yeah, the Everglades was a big pass. Go ahead.
There was, I don't know of any pending for next session, but there was a very large compromise that was struck for the Everglades restoration. I think it was a 10-year ongoing between the environmental groups, the farmers, the sugar producers to come up with a plan for Everglades restoration. And it was pretty historic. I remember when we were voting on it in the House, they talked about for hundreds of years that we've been working on this, and it finally came to fruition. I passed the House, and Senator Galvano said it passed the Senate. I would assume that the governor will pass it. That really goes a cumulative program for Everglades restoration. I think it taxed all of the farmers that surrounded that area, what was like $5 an acre, to pay for the rest of the restoration that was needed for the Everglades. Other than that, I don't know of anything that would be coming. You're probably always going to see things as it relates to water quality and water quality standards in the state of Florida. Numeric nutrient, I think we've beaten that thing for the last couple of years pretty heartedly, so I don't know if you'll see anything on that again. But the Everglades restoration was a big issue that we were able to get through the legislative process this year. So coming next year, I'm sure you'll see the typical water quality issues, but nothing. And then there was a fertilizer dispute that was going on, the same fight that happens every couple of years, but I don't think that passed. So you may see something as it relates to fertilizer again in the ordinances that I know Manatee County and Sarasota County are very involved with.
Ms. Carpenter.
Good morning. On behalf of the school system, I want to thank each and every one of you for your representation and in particular your support of education. Everybody knows that we're getting our house in order. We have a new senior management team in place, and we will get there to better serve our 45,000 children and our 5,000 employees, but we really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we're gonna close only a couple minutes early. Reminder: we have a special election June 18th on two very important issues to Manatee County, both the health care sales tax and the economic development property tax exemption. The Chamber is in support of both of these priorities, so please vote on June 18th. A special thank you again to Bright House Networks for their continued support and to our legislative delegation for being here today. Also to METV for taping today's event, and also thank you for IMG for this wonderful breakfast and location. It's just beautiful out there. So you all have a wonderful day and have a beautiful Chamber of Commerce day. Thank you.
Nice job.